Controversy over regulating credit card fees, taxpayers subsidizing a coffee corporation, infrastructure funding for private businesses, Michigan transportation taxes, and primary election results. Welcome to the States, powered by the Center Square. It's Wednesday, June 24th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. An Illinois law impacting what transactions financial institutions can tack on a fee on could send ripples across the country for everyday consumers and small businesses. What's happening here? Well, in 2024, Illinois' state budget included a first-in-the-nation Interchange Fee Prohibition Act. Simply put, it prohibits financial institutions from charging a fee when someone uses a credit or debit card on taxes and tips, but just in Illinois. Now, the fee can be added to the goods or services, but not to the taxes and tips. Financial institutions ended up going to court, and the state approved an extension this year for when the measure is to kick in. Now, barring any judicial regulatory intervention, the Illinois Act, it'll take effect July 1st in 2027. Now, with more on what some say is one state possibly upending the national payment system, we're joined by Steve Swedberg, policy analyst with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Steve, thanks for taking time with us here on the States. You looked deep into this issue and the potential impacts that it could have on consumers and small businesses alike with the report, The Hidden Costs of Interchange Fee Bans. What did you find?
Well, we found a few things. Number one, this is often passed as a consumer protection provision. What happens in reality, and what I ended up doing was looking at previous history, particularly with the Durbin Amendment when they put a cap on interchange fees. What happened as a result of that was that, well, for one, the consumers really didn't get any of those savings that proponents thought were going to happen. And another issue is they experienced a higher cost elsewhere with their financial services, whether or not they lost free checking, whether or not they paid additional fees elsewhere, or they had fewer rewards. And that's just on the consumer side, never mind what happened with financial institutions or even smaller merchants.
Yeah, your report delving into other analysis, looking at Senator Dick Durbin's amendment for a cap on fees, and you found $6.5 billion in reduction in annual bank revenues. Now, that means, the banks are going to have to find a way to make up that revenue. Banks reducing the availability of free checking accounts. Free checking accounts having fallen 60% before being implemented and 20% afterwards, with nearly doubling monthly fees as well as a result. This trickles down to the consumer.
Oh, no, absolutely. And oftentimes when people pass policy, they think of it like it's a machine, like you adjust one little gear or screw and it's fine. But in reality, it's more like an ecosystem. When you do pass a regulation like this, there's ripple effects that happen with multiple actors in multiple ways that are unintended or unanticipated. And that's really what this paper gets at. It's what is the status quo versus the alternative. And we have seen the alternative with the Durbin Amendment and what happens with debit card interchange fees.
And again, what we're talking about is not the Durbin Amendment. We're talking about an Illinois state policy dealing with similar types of fees, but specifically fees that may now, according to Illinois' law, starting July 1st of 2027, can't be added to the transactions involving taxes and tips. What's the possibility that if this law survives court challenges, it could possibly spread across the country?
I mean, I would say it's pretty decent because number one, you're seeing copycat bills. There was recently one in Colorado. Fortunately, Governor Polis did veto it because he was concerned about a litigation and that the cost would be too high and that the benefit would be too low. You're seeing a few other states like Delaware toying, and like New York and New Jersey toying with the possibility of it. And when you have one state pass it, it's tricky because the payment network, that infrastructure is national. So if it happens, if you have it in one state, then it makes it more complicated to process payments and to do the fraud protection and the dispute resolution that the interchange fees fund, and it makes it more difficult to maintain that system if you have this as a result, because it's not as simple as a software update. You're talking about multiple parties within a complex system across borders that would all need to be implemented and do the transaction costs, which would be much higher than a simple software update.
Now, of course, in Colorado, if that did become the policy similar to what Illinois is, you broke down some of the financial impact, some of the economic impact that could be fallout from such a policy going into effect. Talk a little bit about some of those numbers.
I mean, in terms of like I'd have to pull up the specific numbers, but
sure.
There were some concerns that it would. There was some modeling from at the Common Sense Institute. They were looking more at the consumer impact. And again, what's tricky about trying to get like an actual estimate. I was trying to use previous interchange fee bands to get a proxy, but this is really a first of its kind of law. And the reason why this one would be more complex versus the Durbin Amendment is because the transaction, when you put a transaction through on the credit card, it comes with the total. The system's really not capable of being able to provide the breakdown. So if you require that in one state, now you have a fragmented payment system, and that makes the compliance more complicated. And that's also true for smaller merchants, because if there's a partial refund or a full refund, and then you have to do that dispute resolution, that makes it more complicated for smaller merchants, which, in spite of what like retail associations are saying, it's going to be the smaller merchants that can't handle those compliance and auditing costs, whereas the larger ones can, which is why the Electronic Payments Coalition found that the largest benefit companies that are at benefit are going to be like Walmart, Amazon, and Home Depot. It's not going to be the little guy, even for the merchants.
And interesting, I followed the Illinois story closely back in 2024 when it was implemented. It was part of a budget negotiation where the retailers who have to pay taxes they collect, right? They act as the middleman. They collect the taxes and they submit those taxes to the government, the state. I'm sure this happens all across the country, but they get charged a portion of that to essentially do that. So there was an agreement between the retailers and the governor's office to reduce the burden on the retailers collecting that tax in exchange for having this interchange fee prohibition. What does that say about how these types of deals are coming together with different interests involved?
Well, in that specific scenario, it's less about consumer protection, even though that's what the proponents purported it to be. But as you discussed, the back deal room had to do with a negotiation between the state and the retailers, and it came out a political compromise.
Yeah, and to the possibility of this spreading elsewhere, of course, that depends on what happens in the courts. But as you researched, you found that CSI did put some numbers, just estimates on what would happen if, say, Colorado adopted this policy. And you can kind of translate this to other states as well, but they said it would reduce Colorado's GDP by about $1.3 billion by the fifth year of such a policy being put into place. And they also estimate that it would cut annual personal income by $1.1 billion and eliminate roughly 8,800 jobs. Plus, you've got merchants that could possibly save around $110.5 million annually. This is all going to impact the economic outcomes.
Absolutely. You're gonna the smaller banks and credit unions are gonna have a harder time with compliance. The merchants are gonna have more compliance and auditing costs, and consumers everywhere are gonna pay. And the more states that do this and create a bigger patchwork system as a result, the larger those effects will be. And it won't affect just the states that pass it. It'll eventually, the most likely outcome is that will eventually affect all 50 states.
And where do you see this going? It's still kind of in the courts, and Illinois delaying implementation until possibly seeing some kind of resolution in the courts. How integral is that decision by the courts on this and giving it some finality?
Oh, for sure. Like the OCC, when they made their ruling, that was kind of gave Colorado a second thought to the point of vetoing it. They thought it wasn't worthwhile implementing it. And with regards to Illinois, this is actually the second time they've delayed the law, implementing the law. And I think other states are kind of questioning whether they should implement it, and just giving pause to it, just given how it does affect the national payment network system.
Steve Swedberg, policy analyst with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Be sure to seek out his report about what the impacts of such a measure could mean for other states all across the country. We'll be right back with more. Taxpayers across the country pay a good amount to attract developers, and they may not know to exactly what extent. Following this segment, we'll be talking with investigative reporter with the Center Square about state taxpayers in Tennessee subsidizing a major coffee company and the parameters around those benefits. But there are local level taxing mechanisms that are considered to be one of the most common and widespread across the country that's being used in an attempt to boost economic development. And that's tax increment finance districts. Now, TIFs, also known as tax increments reinvestment zones, or TIRZ in Texas, tax allocation districts, or TADs in Georgia, or enhanced infrastructure financing districts, or EIFDs in California, these generally allow municipalities, sometimes counties, to designate a particular geographic area, freeze the existing property tax base at a level. The taxing body then captures the future increase in that property tax revenue, which is then put into a fund for the increment and used for new development. And they have that increment from rising values within the district. Now, the different types of means that this money can be used for in these different districts: public infrastructure, site preparation, land acquisition, environmental remediation, or sometimes direct payments for development costs. Where's this happening? You might be able to find it right in your backyard at a city council meeting or at a county board meeting. And discussions about what about education funding, property taxes going for some of those things might not have as much if there's a TIF district in place. What are the terms of the TIF district? Is it 27 years? Are they extending TIF districts beyond that time? Because another relatively lesser known fact of some TIF districts is when a TIF district's time is up, the money that's left in that increment acts as a windfall to the property tax recipients, the taxing body that was holding off getting those funds. But in California Tuesday, State Senator Christopher Cabaldon, he laid out his plans to use such a measure to attract a large corporation to his district.
In this particular instance, this is a mechanism that can be quite powerful in making California's bid for the MLB a reality. And so this carries statewide significance, and with one California team now departing for Las Vegas, this effort would allow our state to maintain its current number of MLB franchises, including here in Northern California.
Now, whether there's been indication as to why one professional team is deciding to leave California to head to Las Vegas, that's another issue altogether. But there are questions about the bill that was brought forward to try to use these special tax increment districts in California to attract a major corporation over others who might already be in California. Democratic Assembly member Chris Ward, he voiced some of his concerns over this particular issue.
How do we counter the argument that we're using a tool that's meant for public benefit, but the tax increment and the future benefit is going towards a private sports facility?
The stadium that is there today was financed without that kind of investment. But what's I think important to remember is that for both kinds of districts, EIFDs and for IRFDs, we're talking about investments in the infrastructure. So unlike, for example, the Irwindale project for the Raiders, I think it was, or similar projects where essentially they're trying to figure out how to subsidize directly the development itself. You basically write a check to the sports team or to the stadium developer. These resources are for the infrastructure associated with the project, and so they are to the benefit of the overall community because they are the sidewalks, the roads, in the case of the existing stadium, it was on septic before, sewer systems and whatever, which then provided the platform for all other amenities.
Now, some of these deals do come with even more concerns. As I mentioned, the diversion of these revenues from schools, counties, and other overlapping governments. City councils look at these TIF districts for development, but they have to weigh whether or not a decrease in the amount of increased revenue coming into the coffers is enough to provide for those economic benefits they may see in some of these developments. But there's also questions about how these dollars are used for potentially non-blighted or already growing areas. Some of the basis of tax increment finance districts across the country seem to hinge upon trying to find development in some blighted areas. But time and again, you may find in your backyard they're using it for non-blighted or already growing areas that may not need incentive for certain businesses to expand. There's also questions about the overall economic impact. Some studies do suggest that reallocation of development may not be the best use to target new growth, and the question of that economic impact persists. But there's also questions about competition among jurisdictions. Is one jurisdiction going to provide a more healthy TIF-funded program that the developer is going to use versus another district looking to go even more generous? And what's that going to be for the taxpayer in those districts? Now, again, as with the California case, they're looking to use these districts and the taxpayer dollars in those districts to fund infrastructure for this corporation, a professional sports stadium. But infrastructure, while it can be allowed for some of these, it's not just allowed for TIF districts. You've got states that are also dealing with questions of trying to attract different types of corporations, including in Illinois. The question is, what does that taxpayer cost? In Illinois, officials are scrambling to have some kind of special deal for the Chicago Bears football team. But the Bears, they've been discussing finding a new stadium outside of Chicago for years. And Tuesday, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, he was asked where the deal is with the Bears, given that the Bears made a favorable statement about setting up in Indiana after Illinois' legislative session wrapped up with no deal in sight. And even as Indiana's claiming they have their deal ready to go, Illinois' governor says not so fast.
They don't have a tax that's passed to help pay for it there. They don't yet have the tolls that would be required to pay for it there. We don't want to raise taxes on the people of Illinois, and we have offered infrastructure support, which is actually most of what the Bears have been asking for. And so we think we're actually as close as anybody to getting a stadium done here. I don't think Indiana is a whole heck of a lot closer than we are. But, it's up to the Bears to make a decision about where they want to be.
Now, we'll follow more along with that by getting the newsletter at thecentersquare.com. There's also concerns about transparency and accountability with such deals, especially when they're negotiated behind closed doors. Transparency isn't just a concern around TIFs or special carve-outs for one business at the expense of others. There's also economic tools that states are using that's getting some scrutiny. Next, we'll talk with the Center Square investigative reporter Johnny Edwards about what's happening with Starbucks in Tennessee. We'll be right back with more from the States. Tennessee taxpayers handing $30 million to Starbucks to open new corporate offices in that state. But at least 70 times, companies that promised to create jobs in exchange for Tennessee government subsidies haven't held up their end of the bargain. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Joining us to discuss this expensive coffee deal is the Center Square investigative reporter, Johnny Edwards. Johnny, thanks for taking time with us. You and the Center Square's Kim Jarrett report in the past 8 years, the state of Tennessee gave approximately 570 companies almost $758 million in tax dollars under the Fast Track Grant Program. How much is that costing each Tennessee resident?
Well, we've calculated it's $100 per Tennessee resident over that time period.
Now, what does that mean for Tennessee residents? Are they getting an economic benefit from these carve-outs?
Well, it depends on who you ask, but arguably what's shocking about this is, we all, as you explained in your last segment, we hear a lot about the creative ways that states and local communities try to attract business and attract jobs. We hear a lot about tax abatements, tax breaks, leasebacks, free land, free buildings, but states also hand out just pure cash. It happens all the time and all over, at least all over the Southeast. And one of the experts we spoke to, a researcher with Good Jobs First, talked about how competition is part of the problem here because there's this frenzy to attract jobs and attract industry. And now companies are just coming to expect it, whether they really need it or not.
Now let's talk a little bit specifically about Tennessee, and I've seen this pop up in other states as well, different types of tax incentive programs that are based on employment goals. They have to reach X number of employees and they have to retain those employees over a certain number of years. And then they get some kind of tax advantage. Talk about Tennessee's program here. What exactly does this program spell out and how is there going to be accountability?
Well, the Fast Track program's been around at least since 2012. I think it existed in a different iteration before that. But we found that there are these accountability agreements. That's by law. It was written into the law in 2013 that each company that receives one of these humongous grants of taxpayer money has to agree that they will create such and such many jobs. And some of the agreements, I think, might say what the pay will be. Not much beyond that we know of. But they have to, if they don't create that many jobs, the accountability agreement, which we might colloquially call a clawback agreement, says that they have to pay back a certain amount of that money based upon how many jobs they fell short. I think if they fall below 90% of the jobs they promised, they have to pay back a proportionate amount of the money they received. And if it's below 50% of the promised jobs, they have to pay back 100% of what they received. As a matter of fact, my co-writer Kim Jarrett right now is working on a story about Tennessee trying to claw back money from a electric car battery plant in Tennessee that received $3 million and fell way short of its jobs goal.
And it's something that happens quite often when you hear about these types of programs in other states as well, that clawback provision seeming to try to recapture those tax dollars that could be used elsewhere throughout the government's operations. But let's talk a little bit more about Tennessee and the Fast Track program. You guys found 570 companies, $758 million in tax dollars, $100 per Tennessee resident. But in that between 2016 and 2024, you've got $22.5 million that was sought from 14 different companies. 10 fought in court, with 7 going bankrupt. and about close to $8 million that was uncollected, and 14 million that they actually did collect. Does this sound like it's successful in the accountability side of things?
It sounds like it's very, very risky, which is what business is, risky. And that's the problem. That's one of the huge criticisms of this program is it's putting taxpayers on the hook for the risks that businesses normally take. And as someone we spoke to, Justin Owen with the Beacon Center of Tennessee, pointed out, taxpayers don't reap a windfall when these companies succeed. You know, if the jobs do work out and the profits roll in, there's no benefit on the back end. So it's kind of a one-way street for taxpayers.
Now, we talked a little bit about some of the numbers from the past several years in these different companies, but what's Starbucks' deal? What kind of jobs numbers do they got to put on the board? What kind of pay are they getting? And just exactly where does their amount they're getting compare to the range that you've seen in your investigations?
Well, they're promising 2,000 jobs with an average pay of a salary of $125,000 a year, which is very good for Nashville, pretty good for anywhere. Now, what's interesting about that and what I think has sparked a lot of outrage is that Starbucks is a very successful company moving to a highly desirable city of Tennessee. Tennessee's got great infrastructure, a great base of jobs, a lot of amenities. Not to mention the Tennessee doesn't have a state income tax. There's a lot of benefits to Nashville, so it's not like anyone needs to sell a company like Starbucks on Nashville. Now the backdrop too is that Starbucks is moving out of Washington slowly but surely. The company doesn't really admit to this, but it's become very hostile, if you can believe it, in Seattle for Starbucks. Not only did the mayor organize or encourage a boycott of Starbucks over this barista strike, but also there's this new millionaire tax, which the Center Square has reported on quite a lot. And so Starbucks is sort of shifting operations out of Washington State, and they've settled on Tennessee. And there's big questions about whether taxpayers need to pay Starbucks $30 million to sweeten the deal for them to move to a place like Nashville. But again, it's sort of just become par for the course. Companies just expect this. And Stuart McWhorter, the Commissioner of Economic Development for Tennessee, told us it was competitive. They were looking at 3 different states, 3 different sites, and we had to compete. So there you have it.
I'm curious if Maxwell House or Folgers got a similar type of proposal, or if they're seeking similar types of deals and what they could possibly get. You've talked to several people about this, right? And it seems the criticism is, we need more accountability, we need more enforcement. But is it that binary, either enforce the clawbacks, or are you seeing people say, no, we should just do away with these types of incentives altogether?
Well, it's not that the incentives like this can be entirely wrong. Like, imagine if there's a food desert in some part of the state or some part of a community where, there's no good grocery store or good restaurants, and you give an incentive to Kroger or to Publix to put a grocery store there and create jobs and create a service. I mean, that could be a good use of this money. But, a question is, if you are going to give, big, huge, successful companies incentives like this to move to desirable places, why not stack more qualifications in there, like not just a average salary, but perhaps a median salary, perhaps require health care, perhaps require that there's step raises that match inflation, perhaps require that they hire local contractors, people from local businesses to do the construction and the stocking, perhaps require that the workforce be local, be at least within the state of Tennessee. But those things don't ever seem to be added in. And there's also questions, as our story pointed out, we're still seeking more information. I mean, we'd like to know who these 70 companies are that they've tried to claw back money from. Are they all companies that had layoffs or that went under? And, we want to know if Smile Direct Club was one of them. There's a terrible story behind that company that went bankrupt. So there's more to be found out here about whether do they go after every company that has layoffs, or do some get more chances than others and more understanding than others? We don't know. It's sort of speculation at this point.
Now, while your story focuses in on the deal with Starbucks, as you're highlighting there's a lot more to report out about this, because it's a lot of tax dollars involved, and not all of these deals see it to the full fruition where they maintain that level of employment that they guarantee to get that tax break. But you guys did attempt to reach out to Starbucks. Have you had any luck?
Not yet. I mean, I reached a PR representative for Starbucks, and she wouldn't put forward anyone to do an interview. I tried. I mean, I would love to ask them, why did you need this $30 million? What is that for? You know, why would you not have come to Nashville otherwise without the extra $30 million?
Again, people can stay up to date on these investigations and more at thecentersquare.com. Thanks to Johnny for being with us, and we'll check back in with him and the team in the near future. We'll be right back with more from the States. When you're filling up at the pump, do you know exactly where that tax per gallon of gas is going? What about when you go buy a new car battery for your vehicle or wiper blades? Do you know where the money that you're paying in taxes is going? Well, in some areas, they're looking to bring more clarity to taxpayers to show that these dollars are going to where they're intended. Bipartisan legislation in Michigan is looking to make it more clear that regardless where something is taxed, a big box store, a grocery store, or an auto supply store, that the taxes already imposed on transportation-related items actually goes to the state of Michigan's Comprehensive Transportation Fund. Now, other states have done similar types of things to clarify. In Illinois, in particular, they actually had a constitutional amendment saying all transportation-related funds collected by taxes go into a lockbox, and those funds can only be used for transportation-related issues. In Michigan, they're looking to clarify how these funds are paid and collected by the consumer and the retailer. Michigan Democratic State Representative Jason Morgan, he talked about how people buying vehicles, replacing worn-out tires, purchasing a battery or other various parts to keep their vehicle on the road, they do pay transportation-related taxes on those purposes. But Morgan, he said most people would reasonably assume those dollars are going to pay for transportation. He says that's not always the case.
Under the current system, the vast majority of sales tax collected on many auto parts, fluids, and accessories is redirected to the general fund to support unrelated budget items. Only about 7% of those dollars ultimately make their way to the Comprehensive Transportation Fund to support transportation services. On top of that, there's a growing gap in how we capture these revenues. Decades ago, people bought their car batteries, tires, windshield wipers, and other auto parts at their local dealership or their neighborhood auto parts store. Today, millions of Michiganders buy those same exact items at big box retailers, warehouses, superstores, those types of places. When a family buys a set of tires at Costco or replaces their windshield wipers on a trip to Meijer, they're still making transportation-related purchases. Yet the sales tax generated from those purchases often does not flow to transportation in the same way. Those dollars right now purchased outside of auto parts stores do not go to transportation. They go to the general fund. House Bill 6079 is a practical, common-sense solution to solve this problem. First, it ensures that the full constitutionally permitted sales tax on auto-related purchases is directed to the CTF, creating a more stable and dedicated source of transportation funding. Second, it modernizes state law to reflect how Michiganders actually shop today, ensuring that if you buy your car parts at Meijer or online or wherever else, we're still categorizing those purchases as transportation and making sure they go to the infrastructure. Importantly, this bill does not raise taxes by a single cent. Taxpayers are already paying these taxes. It's just how we categorize them.
Now, analysis by Michigan House staff of this bill report that the act requires at least the 6.975% of sales taxes collected at the rate of 4% by specific businesses on sales of motor vehicles and vehicle parts and accessories to be distributed to that fund for transportation. Now, the Michigan House analysis also said that the bill would increase to 25% the portion of the sales tax collected at that rate of 4% from auto-related sales that is distributed to the fund. They would expand the businesses whose sales can be considered auto-related and base the determination of whether a sale is of motor vehicle parts and accessories on the product being sold rather than on the business making the sale. Now, what are the financial impacts to the state of Michigan from this? And based on the most recent transportation revenue forecast, that House analyst says that this would change the amount of the CTF, the Transportation Fund, seeing an increase of $225 million in extra revenues. But that would correspond to a decrease in the General Revenue Fund for Michigan by that same $225 million in fiscal year 2027 to 2028. Now, the bill would also require that taxpayer submit a report on actual sales taxes collected for parts and accessories. Now, other points in the analysis from the Michigan House, the bill would increase the Department of Treasury administrative costs in Michigan, but by an unknown amount. And they said, therefore, it's unknown whether the department could absorb the costs under current appropriation levels. Now, Morgan, he went on to discuss different parts of the goal of this particular proposal, and that's to identify and categorize those taxes on certain transportation-related items bought at a big box store, and instead ensure that they go to the Comprehensive Transportation Fund, and that could reduce, he says, the reliance on property taxes.
The Comprehensive Transportation Fund also supports rail and other infrastructure mechanisms under transportation as well. So we've been talking about local bus operating, but it's not just local buses that is part of the Comprehensive Transportation Fund. So you would see the benefit in a whole number of ways. And I would also add, I think you would also see a very positive impact at the local level from transit agencies right now that are needing to increase their millage rate because their costs are going up and their reimbursement from the state are not going up. My hope would be that you would see less demand on the local property tax base to fund transportation because the state would be doing more of our part to support those services throughout Michigan.
Not such a proposal will indeed provide extra revenue from the state to local units of governments to help fund things like public transportation via bus. It'll be seen after this measure advances and actually gets implemented. We'll also see what the actual cost is, not just to the state to administer this type of change and reclassification, but what about the cost to small businesses and having to recalibrate just exactly how they transfer certain taxes to Michigan. But last week, the Michigan House Speaker, Matt Hall, a Republican, he said that the budget being presented by Democrat Governor Gretchen Whitmer is looking for more revenue than what Republicans are looking for. And he says this idea of lowering property taxes needs to happen.
Now, I'll remind you, their document was, I heard, $19.5 billion. Our proposal on the high side is $5 billion. And you know, in a negotiation, you're probably not going to get everything you want, right? But I do want to see dramatic property tax cuts, ending the state property tax, ending the pop-up tax, getting rid of the real estate transfer tax, and this personal property tax. And then we want to force the utilities to lower their rates by $1 billion, which would wipe out the last 3 years of rate increases. We'll see what counter proposal comes from the administration.
Final budget's due to Michigan's governor by July 1st, with the new fiscal year in Michigan set to start October 1st. You can follow more from the team at the Center Square by getting the newsletter at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more from the States. All right, welcome back to the States. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. Several far-left congressional candidates backed by New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani defeated more moderate Democrats in Tuesday's New York primaries, in the first major test of the young Democratic Socialists' rising star power. The Center Square contributor Chris Wade reports Mamdani-backed former city comptroller Brad Lander defeated two-term U.S. Representative Dan Golden in New York's 10th congressional district, which includes Lower Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn. Claire Valdez, another Mamdani-backed candidate, bested Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso in New York's 7th district, which includes sections of Brooklyn and Queens. Meanwhile, M. Doloriza Avila Chalvarez, who Mamdani endorsed just days before the primary, was slightly ahead of five-term Democratic U.S. Representative Adriano Espaillat in New York's 13th congressional district Tuesday night. New York voters were also deciding contests and primaries Tuesday for state Senate and state assembly, with 63 state Senate and 150 state assembly seats up for grabs in November. Current makeup of the New York legislature, Democrats hold a 2-1 margin over Republicans in the state house. Elections officials reported lighter turnout yesterday than in previous primaries in New York. Alan Wilson, son of Congressman and four-term Attorney General, Tuesday won a place on the Republican ticket for South Carolina governor ahead of a candidate endorsed by Donald Trump. The Center Square managing editor Alan Wooten reports Wilson, in unofficial results with 100% of counties reporting, defeated Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette 68.6% to 31.4% in a race with more than 318,000 votes cast. In other election news, Colorado's 3rd congressional district primaries have been defined by changes in President Donald Trump's endorsements, a late challenger, and environmental concerns. The Center Square contributor Liam Hibbert reports the pair of June 30th contests features 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, as incumbent Republican Jeff Hurd looks to hold on to his seat after an endorsement by Trump. That follows the Republican president's earlier criticisms of Hurd and an endorsement of a different candidate in that GOP primary. Colorado, they vote next week. Meanwhile, an Antifa member was sentenced to 100 years in prison Tuesday following a guilty verdict in a plot to target an Immigration and Customs Enforcement detention center in Texas nearly a year ago. Several others also received lengthy prison sentences, that is, from the same attack. And Center Square's Sarah Roderick Fitch reports that 8 individuals were found guilty on terrorism-related charges in March, the first in the nation after President Donald Trump designated Antifa a domestic terror organization. Benjamin Song was identified as the group's leader and received the harshest punishment of 100 years in prison. Others receiving sentences of 70 years and 50 years and 30 years. A 9th individual is set to be sentenced July 1st. Now, the group was accused of being part of the North Texas Antifa cell. They were found guilty of rioting, using weapons and explosives, providing material support to terrorists, obstruction, and attempted murder, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Northern District of Texas. Now, Fitch reports that this comes after the president in September decided to designate Antifa an international terror designation, and that followed a question that Fitch asked of the president in the Oval Office at the White House. And you can find that story in the description below, along with many others at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. You can join us back here Thursday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all across the country, only with the states, powered by the Center Square.